Live.
All right, so this is our T session 44, securing a workstation best practices. So extremely important and relevant to pretty much any job that you will have, whether it's IT related or not. These are good security tips for the everyday person to keep your stuff secure. All right, so our objectives for today. Susan, can you take these for me?
Describe how you would apply the 5 CompTIA best practices to secure a workstation and identify common pitfalls to securing a workstation.
Perfect, thank you. All right, and customer focus will be a key BSM for this session. When you are working with customers, this can mean people that have called you in for IT advice, or it could be you working for a company and your customers are your coworkers. And so we need to make sure that we're maintaining this customer focus and doing a good job explaining these best practices to our clients and our fellow employees, so that way we reduce security risk as we go along. And also personal responsibility. If something goes wrong, you need to own it, but also take that responsibility and try to grow from it. If you know there's an issue with security and it's on you, make sure that you own it, but figure out how to prevent it from happening again in the future. So responsibility goes both ways. You own the bad, but you also own the good and show that you can grow from mistakes. All right, so our 5 best practices. Let's see. DW, will you take these?
The 5 categories of best practices involved when securing our workstation are: number 1, password; number 2, account management; 3, disable auto run; 4, data encryption; and 5, patch and update management.
Perfect, thank you. So let's get into password best practices. So it's super important to set strong passwords. Security experts recommend the following criteria when creating a password. So it's a little dated at this point. For the do's, you want to make sure that you're using 12 or more characters. The longer the password is, the better. You want to combine uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and special characters, and use at least one symbol in your password. And I'll say this over and over again: use passphrases, not passwords. You know, passphrase is just going to be a longer password, but they're often easier to remember because it's memorable. So if you know, something that's would be really easy, I'll type it in chat. All right, so there's an example of a passphrase. Kelly Philbin hates Wheel of Time.
Lies.
Which is what makes it such a good password. If you do all of your special symbols first, so Kelly includes all of my special characters. So I've got capital, a number, 2 special characters, and then lowercase. So I've met that criteria at the beginning. So that's the hard part to remember. Just that funky way to spell Kelly. Kelly Philbin hates Wheel of Time. Kelly loves Wheel of Time. But if anybody knows Kelly, they would never guess this passphrase. And it also, didn't count how many characters it was, but it's a lot. So it's going to be harder for a program to guess. So some don'ts that we also need to be aware of: do not use consecutive letters or numbers such as A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Don't use adjacent keys on your keyboard such as QWERTY. I used to have a friend that would start at the cap lock, run his fingers all the way through A, S, D, F, G, H, J, K, L, semicolon, apostrophe, enter. And he would just run his fingers across the keyboard. And I thought it was the coolest thing, because it was just like, whoop, and he got in, and it was so cool, but it's not very secure. So don't use consecutive or adjacent keys on the keyboard. Don't use your sign-in name in the password. So
QWERTY was
if,
always my favorite.
what was that, Kelly?
QWERTY was always my favorite.
QWERTY, yeah. So I would not use my name in my password. Don't use words in any language. That's not really, I mean, you kind of use words. If you use a passphrase, it's a
If
little.
you're using an individual word, you don't
If
use
you-
words of any language.
Yeah.
That's what they're gearing at. If you're using a password,
Yeah.
an individual word, don't use an individual word of any known language.
Yeah.
Especially considering if somebody knows you, like if somebody knows me, they might say, okay, well, he might be doing his passwords in Gaelic because I grew up, my grandfather spoke it and I learned it when I was a kid. So it's not a language that a lot of people know. So I would gravitate towards that. Well, somebody who knows me would know that. So
Your password would be safe DW, at least from me. So don't use the same password for more than one system. In general, that's a good tip. That goes back to using a password manager, and you can randomize passwords and then keep them in that password manager. Or, I guess it's not best practice, but if it's, some websites that I don't really care about and I don't use, like I don't have any personal information in, I'll use some just generic password to get me in, so that way I have an account for it. But like bank accounts, email, the really important websites, you cannot use the same password. If it gets broken into in some other site, it's added to a list of passwords to just try, and it's very possible they're able to break in. Moral of the story: use the passphrase, don't use passwords. All right, so continuing with our best practices, let's see, Rachel, will you tell us about password expiration?
Password expiration. The longer that a password is used, the more likely it is that it will be compromised in some way. It is for this reason that requiring users to change their passwords at certain intervals increases the security of their passwords. The frequency for changes depends on the level of security required. Most systems prevent users from reusing old passwords by using the password policy setting, password history. Changing default usernames and passwords. Default accounts, usernames, and passwords represent a huge weakness. When an operating system is installed, whether on a workstation or a server, there are certain accounts created with default passwords. The first thing to do is to change them.
Perfect, thank you. And so that also goes back into like our routers. We want to change that default username and password, so that way we can secure the system more effectively. Password expirations are typically used in corporations and companies like we all three work for SMC, and every like month or so they'll send a request for us to change our password for like our email, just to keep it a little more secure. Julian, yes sir.
So I have a question in regards to that password history.
Uh-huh.
Can hackers access this?
I'm not sure. In theory, yes, if it's stored on, like if there's a history file,
If
but
they get the password file, which is where all the hashes are kept, yes, they would potentially have access to password history of the hashes.
Okay, and is there a way to edit this password history? Like, can you delete, like, I don't know, can you delete it? Can you
you can
do whatever
encrypt
you
it.
want with it?
I mean, if you're a hacker and you gain access to any kind of file and you're able to get elevated privileges, yeah, you can do a lot of things with it.
Okay.
But as far as the A+ goes, you don't need to worry about that. As far as the A+ goes, we need to know that password history is just a list of previously used passwords for your account. And so the password history will remember up to, however many that they do for the settings. So you might see you can't use last 2 password that you use, or it could be like the last 10 passwords that you've used. So you can't just, if my password was password 1, I changed it to password 2. I couldn't change it back to password 1 on the 3rd time. I would have to use some other variation, but then I changed it to password 3 on that 3rd time. Since the history is only 2 passwords, I could then reuse password 1.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. All right, so continuing on with best practices for passwords, our BIOS UEFI passwords. Let's see, Leela, take it away.
Passwords should be configured and required to access either the BIOS or UEFI settings on all devices. If this is not the case, it will be possible for someone to reboot a device, enter the settings, change the boot order, boot to an operating system residing on a USB or optical drive, and use that OS as a platform to access data located on the drives. Did you need me to read the other one? You just said the first.
Yeah, well, I did say that, but would you mind reading the second part as well?
No problem. Screensaver required password. A screensaver should automatically start after a short period of idle time, and that screensaver should require a password before the user can begin the session again. This method of locking the workstation adds one more level of security. A more secure method of sign-in, called secure sign-in or secure logon, requires the user to press Control-Alt-Delete to get to a sign-in screen.
Perfect. Thank you, Leela.
You're welcome.
So we want to protect our BIOS or UEFI by having a administrator password when people try to access the BIOS. And that just prevents the everyday person from coming in and getting into those settings, and it prevents them from being able to change any of those settings that we want. We would also disable auto run, but that'll come up a little bit later. Screensaver required passwords. That is extremely, extremely important. That is a very basic security measure that you can take that will keep your systems just a little more secure. And I know Kelly has a good real life example of people not using screensavers and not locking their computers.
I remember my former office.
Yep.
Yeah. So at my previous, yeah, I think I might have mentioned this before, but at my first office job I was at, if you failed to lock your computers and you walked away, you opened yourself up to a lot of pranks where people would come in and they would change settings on your computer, all that kind of fun stuff. And probably about my first 6 months on the job, I thought I would get really funny because my boss walked away and forgot to lock his. So I went over and I changed his keyboard settings. Instead of being QWERTY, which is the keyboard setting you have right now, or if you look up in the upper left-hand side of your keyboard, it spells out QWERTY. So that's why they call it a QWERTY keyboard. Well, when they were designing keyboards, there were two popular models, QWERTY being one, which became the adopted one because it actually slows the typist down. And then the other one was Dvorak, which was the most efficient way to lay out your computer, which all the keys are in different places. They're quite literally laid out to be the most efficient way you could type. So I changed his keyboard settings. So when he would hit like Q, it would be like R. You know, when he would hit like, you know, D, it would be L. So like it completely changed whatever he was trying to type based off of keyboard settings. And him thinking that was a problem with his computer, he instantly restarted his computer, which set all those settings in stone. And now we had to find a way to get back into his computer based off of his password and the new keyboard layout. So I sat there for very, 10 to 15 very stressful minutes with my boss's password, trying to figure out what were the correct keys to hit in order to get his password into his computer. So after that, a very, very important lesson was learned. It was okay to play pranks on my coworkers, just not my boss.
Yep.
So.
And that also leads into a future session about how to best handle security situations like that, where your coworkers aren't locking their systems. It's a good teachable moment when you can do something, silly like changing their background or something like that. But we'll get into that in another session. Steven, what do you mean? Does that include the passwords?
Like the CMOS battery is considered for the BIOS, right? It doesn't reset it. Does that include the passwords?
Not for the main system, only for the BIOS.
Yep. So, yeah. But that goes into another type of securing, which you would physically lock down your desktop. So you could have like a physical lock that prevents a person from opening up the system and using a jumper or removing that CMOS battery to prevent that from happening. So good question, Stephen. And Julian.
I remember now. Every time you access the BIOS or the UEFI, does the event viewer or logs show you that, like every time the BIOS is accessed?
That's a question for Kelly. I'm not really sure, to be honest.
What was the question again?
Whenever someone accesses the BIOS or the UEFI, do the event viewer or the logs show you every time the BIOS is accessed?
I believe it does. But typically in an enterprise setting, you're going to put a BIOS password on it to prevent that from happening regardless. But yeah, I think anytime you go in to do any major settings changes, yes, it will log it.
And every time, say like you have the password for the BIOS and you put an incorrect password, what happens there? Does it like lock you? Does it just not let you access it and you just keep trying, or what happens there?
Well, with regards to BIOS, I think it just doesn't let you in and it allows you to keep trying, but I think UEFI has slightly higher security standards to where it may only allow you to try 4 or 5 times before it will allow you access.
Okay, I'm asking this because I remember one question in one of the mocks. What happens? Something about an intruder entering the BIOS, something like that.
Uh-huh.
So I just wanted to understand that, but that's cool.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you.
All right, continuing on. So these 5, you need to know definitionally, so that way, and to be able to apply it into your questions. So password history, we already went over, where it's just how many passwords it has on file that you've already used. The default number is 0, but it can go as high as 24. Your maximum password age is how long you can use the password for. So if the default is 42 days, after that so on the 43rd day, you'll be asked to change your password. The values go from 0 to 999. Your minimum password age, that's how long you have to use the password for until you are allowed to change it. Why do you think we need a minimum password age? DW.
I'm guessing it's to, if someone was to gain access to your password, they don't want them to change it beforehand and then being able to lock that account out or something like that, or gain access whenever they want to.
Potentially. Steven, for security reasons, yes.
Yeah, I was trying to hold
yeah.
back on that one. Why would
But let's
why would we
get
have a lock
more
on the door? For
specific.
security? Yes.
Leela.
I would say for the person to remember their password.
It
I'm just saying
incentivizes
because
them to
I know like
remember.
every time you forget your password, you're just going to change it. So I guess
Uh-huh.
it'll prevent it from changing it so much and remembering it.
So I'll give you a little clue. It has something to do with memory, and it also has something to do with something else on this slide. Julian.
I want to say maybe because I don't even know how to say this. Because there is a maximum password range. That password, I mean age. You adjust that however you want, right?
Mhm.
From 0 to 999.
Uh-huh.
So depending on however long you set that to be, then it's easier for the system to know when you're supposed to change it and not to prompt you beforehand.
Yeah.
No?
Well, that's why we have the maximum, but we're trying to figure out where we have the minimum. DW, you want to give it another shot?
Yeah, I guess it's with the password history, since like after resetting it twice, you can go back to an older password. They don't want you to just keep switching until you get back to that older
Exactly.
password that you had.
Exactly. So if we have a password history of 2 and we have a minimum password age of 0, you're prompted to reset your password. So you create a new password, ask it to redo another one because you don't have a minimum password age, and then you redo it again. And on that 3rd attempt, you can go back to that original password. And so that is a pretty major security flaw if you do not have your password ages set appropriately. So it just prevents you from reusing passwords too frequently. Tistau.
The reason? I didn't get the reason.
So we have a minimum password age. So that way, so let's say that our password history is set to 2. Okay, so it saves 2 of your previously used passwords, your 2 most recent, in its history. So when you change your password, so let's imagine we have password A, B, and our new password is C. Okay, so when we put in that new password, password A is lost, password B is in history, and password C moves into history. So that way, that's how it rotates, essentially. So if you don't have a password age, a minimum password age, you can keep resetting your password as many times as you need or want. So by making sure that there's a minimum password age, it prevents the user from just recreating the passwords or like resetting the passwords and resetting the password history. Right. And Tistau,
Yes, my question actually, from 0 day to 999 days. After that one to, what will happen for the password? Is set up to automatically or is work?
yeah, so it will automatically, well, for the maximum range, after whatever day you set, it will automatically ask you to reset your password. For the it won't send you any notification that you can change your password. It just prevents you from requesting to change your password.
Okay.
Good question. Right. But then we also have our minimum password length. So the minimum length that it needs to be for default is 0, meaning that no password is required, but that's not very secure. But you can specify up to 14. And then the password must meet complexity requirements. That just means that it needs to have a uppercase, lowercase, special character, and number. So it has to have all 4 of those. And by default, it's disabled. So you can enable that as the security person. All right, so account management. Let's see. Aster, would you take this slide for me?
Restricting user permissions. When assigning user permissions, follow the principle of least privilege. By giving user only the bare minimum, they need to do their job. Assign permission to groups rather than users, and make sure members of groups as they change roles or positions. Login time restrictions. Users should have access to the network and its resources only during work hours. Typically, access is allowed from about an hour before their workday until about an hour after their day ends. For certain users who tend to work through the day and night, this system may not work.
Perfect, thank you, Esther. So restricting user permissions, this is a extremely big concept that you need to take hold of. So we need to make sure that the users on our network only have the permissions to do their job, nothing more. You want to provide them with the least amount of privilege as you can possibly give them. And as a base rule, that's what you should go by. Ideally, when you're getting into having a more efficient system, you don't give the users permissions at all, but you give groups permissions. So accounting should be able to access accounting information, but they should not be able to access administration information or sales information. You know, you want to keep the group, you want to make sure that they have the permissions they need and nothing more. But it's called the principle of least privilege. It is a big security concept. You will see this. You'll also see login time restrictions. So just making sure that, you know, if Kelly works during the day, he works, you know, 9 to 5. I'm going to make sure that he has access to our company network from 8 to 6. But if Mark, he works at night, he comes in at, you know, at 6 o'clock and, you know, he stays all the way to, you know, 6 in the morning, whatever. I would give him access between 5 p.m. and 7 a.m. So that way, Mark shouldn't be able to access it throughout the day, only when they're supposed to work. All right, so continuing on account management. Let's see, Susan, will you take this slide for me?
Disabling guest accounts to secure the system. Disable all accounts that are not needed, especially the guest account, which is disabled by default. Next, rename the accounts if you can. Microsoft won't allow you to rename an account to an administrator. Finally, change the passwords from the defaults and add them to the cycle of passwords that routinely get changed. Failed attempts lockout. Almost all password systems are set up to allow only a set number of failed password attempts before the account is locked. While this policy may generate more password reset calls, that effect can be mitigated by implementing a complementary policy that allows the account to be automatically re-enabled after a set amount of time. So with that, how us as an IT person should not know the user's passwords, but inevitably they're gonna forget their password. How do you retrieve that, or is that something we'll get to later?
So we do not retrieve passwords. We do not get passwords for people. We use automated systems that will that they will go through to verify that they are who they say they are, and they will reset their password through those, you know, through that means. And, you know, if somebody is continuously forgetting their password, then you're going to need to have a conversation with them on, you know, being an adult and remembering your password. But
Cool.
yeah, it's, you know, we're in a professional world, and our job is to keep the system secure. And sometimes that just means, you know, having to play a little bit of hardball occasionally. So, but we should never, as an administrator, you should never know any of anybody's passwords other than your own. And when I worked for Spartanburg County, I had a supervisor that felt like it was important that he know my email password for some reason. And I said, no, that's not happening. If you want to have this battle, we'll have it, but it's not happening. And your supervisor should not have access to your passwords. If you forget your password, you will be able to reset it. No one other than you should know your passwords. So Stephen, to go back to your question, Mark answered part of it. So one, Mark could be a disgruntled employee and he might act as a bad actor, or someone that knows Mark isn't here during the day, so Mark isn't using his account. He could pretend to be Mark because Mark's not there, and Mark won't know if someone's using his account because he's not there. So that's another reason why we would have that the hours. Did he ask for my social security as well? No, he didn't ask for that. He didn't push it very fast or very far.
Date of birth, mother's maiden name.
Yeah.
What's the name of your first pad?
No, they don't have any access to see passwords. If they want to see the work you're doing, there are different means to go about that, but they should not have access to your account. So yeah, failed attempt locked out. If you mess up too many times, it locks you out. That's a good, easy security measure. And if you see, Mark has really been trying to get into his account, but hasn't been able to get in, I should go have a conversation with see what's going on. Mark's out on vacation. Okay, somebody's trying to use Mark's account to get in while Mark's away. So I know semi what to look for. Yeah, good example, Lila. All right, and timeout / screen lock. So once again, it's a good practice to protect the screen when someone steps away. So after a while, it automatically goes to a screensaver. There we go. It's back. So this does two things. It secures the system. So if, Kelly walks away, his system is protected. So that way I can't come in and pretend to be Kelly because his system's unlocked. But it also makes sure that the screen is constantly moving. So if you're using a display that is prone to burn-in, it changes the image enough so that way you're not getting that burn-in and your screen will last longer. All right, disable auto run. This is huge. Please, 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 if you are an administrator, security person, whatever, disable auto run on your computers. This will prevent a person from connecting a flash drive to the computer and it running automatically. That is you go ahead, Kelly.
I was just saying it's like one of the biggest security threats.
Yeah.
Period. The easiest way to infiltrate a system is quite literally just scatter some USB drives around. People will inevitably plug it in to see what's on it. How many here have done it? Found a USB drive. Oh, interesting. Plug it in, see what's on there. Easiest way to infect the system. In fact, the nuclear centrifuges in Iran, that's how they were able to bring them down. They scattered USB drives around the facilities, and the engineers there picked them up, plugged them in to see what was going on. It infected the systems with the virus. When they spun up the centrifuges, got them higher than they could sustainably hold, and were able to take out over 20% of their nuclear centrifuges by just using social engineering attacks with USB drives.
And all of that could have been avoided with a simple auto run disabling. So please, please, please be aware of auto run. Yeah, it'll ask.
That's when you have auto run disabled. If you don't have auto run disabled, Steve, it'll automatically spin it up and start running programs that's on there. When you have auto run disabled, it'll say, do you want to do this?
Yep.
When you don't, it just runs it, if it's programmed to do so.
So data encryption. Let's see, Stephen, will you take this slide?
Data encryption is possible both on a drive level, BitLocker, and on an individual file level, EFS. However, there must be a balance between security and usability. Any encrypted file must be decrypted to be open and encrypted again to be safe. This requires CPU cycles on the device. If you attempt to encrypt everything, the performance of the device may make it practically unusable.
Exactly. And so we need to know BitLocker. We need to know EFS. BitLocker is on the drive level. EFS is on the individual file level. You want to secure the very important files, the things that you're not accessing constantly, but you need to make sure that's secure. That's super important that it's encrypted. But you can't encrypt everything because it'll slow everything down where it's impossible to use. So you just have to find that balance of what's usable and secure enough for your purposes. All right, patch update management. Vincent, can you take this one?
It says, wow, many patches and updates either repair something that doesn't work or add some additional functionality. Many of them close a security hole. These are called hot fixes because they come out as soon as they are available, and you need to apply them as soon as possible. For best results in patch management, a system administration should deploy an automatic system that can check for, download, and make available to the network all patches and updates for all systems. A good example of such a system is Microsoft Windows Turbo Update Services, which can manage the updates for both servers and clients and for other operating systems as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Vincent.
Sure.
So although we do want to, make sure that our patch management is up to date and that these hot fixes are applied as quickly as possible, you want to make sure to test it on a test device first that is off the network. So that way you know if the hot fix actually works and that if it doesn't bring the rest of your system down when updating. All right, so some common pitfalls to securing a PC. As Susan has said, forgetting passwords. This happens all of the time. It's an easy fix because you can have it automated for the most part. But after a while, if a single person is forgetting over and over again, that's going to need to be a conversation that has to be had. Worst case scenario, is when the administrator forgets their password. So if you are an administrator, you need to take extra steps to remember your password in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, too much encryption. If there's too much encryption, it can just bring everything down to a halt. So just make sure that you're encrypting the most important and sensitive data, but lightening up the further out it gets. Updates and patches. Not every update or patch improves security. So downloading and installing a proper patch or updates may affect the overall functioning of the operating system. Once again, try it on a test computer first, so that way you don't bring everything down. All right, give you guys a second. Oh, I'll stop sharing.